Hey everyone, I hope everyone is doing well. I wanted to talk with all of you today about a very important topic that I encounter a lot as a therapist, and that's the issue of thoughts of suicide or self injury. I've worked a lot with this particular concerns in my career since I was first licensed as a counselor in 2013, um, and so suicidality and thoughts of self harm, self injury behaviors actually pretty common. But people, I find, clients a lot of the time have a lot of hesitation to bring these things up in therapy. Um, but they're actually really common, especially for certain client problems. Clients who have a depression or borderline personality disorder, or sometimes even anxiety disorders, will very commonly experience periodic or even recurring thoughts of suicide, suicide attempts, or attempts to self harm, to self injure. Um, so I wanted to kind of talk with all of you about this today. It's a very important topic, and I wanted to also make you aware of a relatively new resource that you may not be aware of. If you are in fact experiencing thoughts of suicide or self harm, self injury. So recently, the federal government in the U.S. came out with a new service, 988, which is an emergency helpline. They have crisis counselors on staff to take your calls. It's free, it's confidential to call, and you can call anytime, day or night. They're there to help you. I think of it as like the 911 for mental health concerns. But it's 988, and they actually have a website. It's 988lifeline.org. But definitely check them out if you or someone you know is or has had thoughts of suicide or has engaged in self-injury. I wanted to kind of talk though about why individuals tend to have thoughts of suicide or self-harming urges. Um, so when I say self-harming, I'm really referring to some individuals, when they're under extreme distress, will make attempts to cut themselves. They might pick at their skin. Um, they might pull out their hair, which is usually a pretty non-lethal attempt at self-harm. But cutting oneself or burning oneself or picking at skin, those can get pretty serious pretty quickly. And I look at it as kind of almost like our mind's burglar alarm system. When we're having thoughts of suicide, when we're having thoughts to self harm, that's really our mind's way and our emotional system's way of letting us know that something really needs to be attended to, that we're really not doing well in that moment. Um, and I discussed this in the previous video briefly, but individuals, when they have thoughts of suicide or self harm, self injury, their thinking tends to be very all or nothing, very black and white. Um, Things will never get any better. I will always feel this way. There's no one who understands what I'm going through. When in reality, there probably are people who are going to understand what the individual is going through. Um, and they don't tend to always feel that way. They feel that way in the moment, and it feels really intense. But a lot of the time, individuals who have had suicide attempts or thoughts of suicide, they might have them, when things get really, really stressful. And then once the stressor kind of goes away or gets better in the moment, the thoughts of suicide go away. Um, they no longer feel tempted to act on those thoughts. So what I do as a therapist, when someone tells me, when a client says to me, I've had thoughts of suicide, or I've engaged in, self-harm, self-injury. I attempt to really talk with them about the things that they can do to manage those thoughts more constructively and to minimize any risk that might be there. So for instance, if a client tells me, I have recurring thoughts of suicide and I've attempted suicide in the past, maybe by overdosing. Well, we don't want that individual to have access to a lot of medications because that's going to increase the risk that they might act on that when they're feeling really distressed. But as I said a minute ago, when the stressor tends to get better, tends to go away, tends to work itself out, the thoughts of suicide tend to go away as well. So it really is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. It feels very, very hopeless for the individual in the moment. But usually, if we can talk about the thinking, talk about ways to keep the individual safe until they start to feel a little bit better, and their thinking begins to clear, then we can reduce risk. And so what I do as a therapist, a lot of people I think are really reluctant to talk about thoughts of suicide because they think that they think that they're going to feel stigmatized in some way. A lot of people, especially people who have not been in therapy before, they think if I talk about having had thoughts of suicide, they're going to put me in a padded cell somewhere and throw away the key. And, that's not what I really do as a therapist. I want to try every avenue I can find to work with the client to really reduce their risk of acting on those thoughts when they feel distressed. So we work together and talk about ways that the client can help keep themselves safe until, as I said, until the stressor tends to reduce in intensity and their thinking begins to clear a little bit. So I engage them in a process called safety planning, and we just talk together about the things that they can do to keep themselves safer until they start to feel a little bit better. And that might mean minimizing access to things that could increase their risk. As I said a minute ago, maybe limiting their access to medications in the moment. But it also really talks about, when we talk about safety planning, we're really referring as well to things that the client can do to help themselves feel even a little bit better when they start to feel really hopeless. And so especially with individuals who've been struggling with depression, it's really hard for them sometimes to really remember or keep in mind, the things that are really helpful to them because their thinking gets so focused on what's wrong or what they perceive to be wrong. So really kind of having a written reminder on hand of what's helped me feel better in the past when I felt like this. Well, it helped me to get on the phone with, this friend of mine and talk to them. It helped me to get out of the house and go for a walk. That's something I haven't done in a while. It helped me to watch my favorite television show. It got my mind off of that, even temporarily. So that's kind of what we do with the safety planning process. We try to reduce risk and really help the individual identify ways that they can help themselves feel better in the moment if those thoughts come back. But I would encourage each and every one of you, even if you yourself have never struggled with thoughts of suicide or the impulse to self-harm, to self-injure, I would nevertheless encourage you to check out the website for 988. That website again is 988lifeline.org. You may come across someone who really needs that information. They may be really struggling and you're the person that they choose to confide in. It might be a really valuable resource for them. But in the meantime, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be sure to respond to as many as I can. And you might also check out, some of my other content, on TikTok or on my Facebook channel. But also check me out at briansharpcounseling.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I hope everyone has a great week. You guys take care.